McCuistion, for over 28 years talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McCuistion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, the Hatton W. Sumner's Foundation, helping to educate the public about the fundamental principles of their democracy and thus be in a position to help formulate public policy. The University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future.
Well, I'm Dennis McCuistion, and the topic for today's program is anti-Semitism. We're going to talk about what it is, if it's a serious problem and more serious today, and what should be done about it. Jim, why don't you introduce our first guest?
Thank you, Dennis, and I'm so glad that we're looking at this topic because it certainly is timely. I think we would all agree that seared into our collective conscious is the Holocaust, but yet sadly, discrimination and hate towards the Jewish people continues, and as we know, it's rising. In the last few years, there have been horrific anti-Semitic attacks in synagogues or Jewish-owned businesses in the United States and really across the world. Most recently here in the nation's capital, we saw on January 6, many of the protesters displayed anti-Semitic symbols. And I'm really pleased that we have two excellent guests to discuss this topic with us. I'm going to introduce Dr. Sara Abosch Jacobson. She's the Chief Education Programming and Exhibitions Officer at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. There, what a job. She oversees all content-related areas at the museum. That includes exhibitions, educational and public programming, survivor relations, and the archives and library. Prior to joining the museum, she was the David Board-Blum Visiting Scholar in Judaic Studies at the University of Memphis. She's a frequent university lecturer on Jewish culture and history, and I know we're going to learn a lot from her today. Dennis, will you introduce Holly?
Yeah, we are delighted to have you, Sara, and joining us from Washington is Holly Huffnagle. Holly is the American Jewish Committee's U.S. Director for Combating Anti-Semitism, where she leads the AJC's effort to protect the Jewish community today. Prior to that, she was with the State Department, and she also worked in the Holocaust Museum in D.C. Holly, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Holly, you were kind enough to send us some information from some recent studies that AJC has done. And I want to start with the definition that you have come up with anti-Semitism. And then we'll talk about how much people really know about this. But the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews, which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews, rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. And I'm sure that just the idea of coming up with a definition was extremely important so that everybody knows what we're talking about. Am I right?
You are right. There wasn't a definition actually until recently, and there's new forms today, and we needed to capture that. And so there's actually several examples that go along with that definition that educators, law enforcement, governments can look to know what anti-Semitism is.
Well, you do have excellent examples there. And if someone wanted to go on to your website and find this document with those examples, how would they do that?
They could go onto our website, ajc.org, and they can search for IHRA, the IHRA definition, and we have a whole booklet actually on that definition in particular.
Yes, you do, and it's an excellent booklet. Now, the second thing I want to mention, and we'll talk about, is a survey that you did of your membership, and you asked this question: how much of a problem, if at all, do you think anti-Semitism is in the United States today? And as the viewers will see from the graphic, 37% said very serious, 51% somewhat, 10% not much, and 1% not much of a problem. So obviously that's an issue, but further on, and you'll see in the next graphic, over the past 5 years, do you think that anti-Semitism in the United States has, here are the choices, increased a lot? 43% said that. Increased somewhat, 39%, stayed the same, 14%, and some with decrease. But you basically got 82% in there, Holly, who say that it's increased a lot in the last 5 years. Why is that?
Absolutely, Dennis. And you know what? A plurality, 43% says it's increased a lot. And, you know, Jewish attitudes, American Jewish attitudes really align with what we're seeing. There's been really since Charlottesville in 2017, but the attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, which was the worst anti-Semitic attack in US history, and the Poway attack in California, Jersey City in New Jersey in 2019, just these continuous attacks, you know, American Jews, you know, have a right to be fearful and actually are now beginning to hide their Jewish identity, increasing security in their synagogues because of these incidents, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's obviously understandable given the situation. You know, one of the things, however, that Jim and I found not unbelievable, but very surprising is how little the American public knows about anti-Semitism. And so the next graphic that you're going to see says, how familiar are you with the term anti-Semitism? And this is something that was given to not just your membership, but to the general public. And heard of it and know what it means, 53%. Heard the term, but not sure what it means, 25%. Never heard of it, 21%. So 46% of the public couldn't really define what anti-Semitism is, or even that there is anti-Semitism. Was that surprising to you, or is it just to someone who doesn't follow it as closely like Jim and me?
Actually, Dennis, I think this was one of our more surprising findings, that nearly half of the American population really isn't familiar with the term. Now, we did explain what the term was, and anti-Semitism, it's a pseudo-scientific sounding word. You know, isn't it easier to use a term like Jew hatred or something like that? And I actually have an argument for why not. But we found that even once the term was explained, when we said, you know, it's hostility toward Jews, still we have 53% of the American public saying that it's either stayed the same or decreased. So they weren't really aware of what was happening in the last 5 years. That is
amazing, given the topics that you just mentioned and the topics that Jim mentioned at the top of the program.
Dr. Abosch, you know, this is a really good lead-in for my first question to you. Where is the breakdown? Is it in education? How do we get better awareness about it? And I know as well that a lot of millennials aren't really even aware about the Holocaust.
It's an excellent question, and it's a hard question to answer. In fact, there's a long historical backstory as to why the Jews became the particular group that was singled out in Europe, which was Christian, as being the one other group there. Europe was not multi-ethnic the way it is today. And so the one group that was different from any other group for more than 1,500 years as Europe went from kingdoms to nation states were the Jews. And they were religiously different, they were culturally different, sometimes they were even visibly different, although frequently not so much because of intermarriage. And when Europeans looked for somebody to scapegoat, somebody to blame for their problems, you don't blame yourselves. That's not how we work as human beings. You blame that other group. And that other group was the Jews. And then you fast forward into modern times, and by that I mean mid-19th century and beyond, and the rise of racialized notions of peoples with the emergence of social Darwinism and the acceptance of the theory of evolution, at least as far as it applies scientifically to various species. And what you do is you roll in sociology and other new kind of what we would call soft sciences into the mix. And Jews are no longer simply other because they're religiously different. They're other because they're now perceived as being racially different. And they're not just racially different, even though, in all honesty, Jews are a religio-ethnicity. They are not a race. But they're also perceived as being conspirators because there are Jews throughout the world. And Jew talks to Jew and ignores international boundaries, ignores national boundaries. And so that speaks to the condition of people as we move into the modern era, and the speed of life just gets increasingly rapid, and you're in factories and you're answering to a clock, and you don't control your own time and your own pace. And again, you look for somebody to blame. And who's the odd man or odd woman out in this? It's the Jew. And so Jews morph from being despised because they religiously didn't accept Jesus as the Christ to being despised because they are at the root of all the problems that come with modernity. It's a nifty thing that the Jews are accused of doing. So.
And so when you look at the Holocaust and Hitler, that was really the foundation, in that the German economy was weak. And so Hitler was, in the Third Reich, was looking for a scapegoat.
It's a little more complicated than that.
I'm sure.
But those outlines aren't wrong. You have, again, millennia of Christian anti-Semitism, and the Germans are Christians, they're Protestants and they're Catholics. So they accept the older style anti-Judaism. And then as you move through the 19th century into the 20th century, and they lose a world war, they take a series of economic hits. They're really ground zero for the fight between two massive ideologies, the ideologies of socialism and communism, and the ideology of fascism, and kind of squeezed in the middle and blamed by both sides in many ways is, you guessed it, the Jew, capital T, capital J. And it's never a good thing when they capitalize your title like that. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Now, Holly, you worked at the Holocaust Museum there in DC, which is very impressive, I might say. That is the museum. I've been there myself. And of course, we have a new one here that Sara is talking about. But virtually everybody, I think, has at least heard of the Holocaust, even though they may not know as much about it. Tell us about what the Holocaust Museum tries to do and how it feeds into the issue that we're talking about now educationally.
It's an important question. I actually think it is important to say that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. I think that is actually a number that we're finding many people don't know when they think about the extent of the genocide, of the state-sponsored, systematic murder of European Jews. In fact, it's an interesting finding, but 63% of Texans ages 18 to 39-year-olds actually don't know that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, and actually 13% of millennial and Gen Z citizens of Texas believe Jews caused the Holocaust. This is a new study out of the Claims Conference. It's just kind of fascinating statistics when we realize this lack of knowledge. The Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., I think, as well as Holocaust institutions all over the world, their core mission is to, educate about the Holocaust, hold on to the survivor stories, share that so it won't happen again. And obviously, we know there's been genocide since the Holocaust, but again, it's educating the public, trying to inculcate these values of empathy. What does it mean to be an upstander, not a bystander, to speak out for the other and take that lesson, even though it's a unique genocide, but the lessons are universal. And I think that's something that the Holocaust Museum in DC is trying to do, is doing well, and will continue to do going forward.
Holly, I want to ask you, we touched on about economic hardship, and that can be a driving force. Obviously, the American economy is in a tough situation right now. Is that perhaps one reason that we're seeing this rise in anti-Semitism, as well as hate towards certainly other minorities, such as the Asian community?
I think so, Jim. In this field, no one has all the answers. If we had all the answers, we'd eliminate anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, it's been around for 2,000 years. We're going to continue to see it. I think it's our job to lower the levels, to work toward lowering those levels. There are several reasons for the rise right now in this moment. They kind of unfortunately work together. Rising global economic uncertainty is one, economic uncertainty in the US is one. We know that Jews have been blamed and scapegoated for economic woes for centuries, in part because of the professions that they were allowed to have in the medieval ages. So this is something that we're continuing to see, but it's empowered by social media and the internet. There's also fading confidence in government, increased emphasis on race and national identity in our country right now. So these things are all working together, unfortunately, to contribute to the rise we're seeing.
Well, one of the things, Holly, that you have in one of your great reports is the, let's just say, myths that surround Jews over the years. And as a recovering banker, as I am, One of the things that typically gets done is that they blame anything financial on Jews because, quote, Jews control the whole financial system. What kind of educational tools do you have there to sort of get the facts out as opposed to stuff that, as Holly mentioned, may show up on social media somewhere?
Well, we have thankfully a whole panoply of tools. We have an actual physical museum, and we're no longer simply a Holocaust museum. When we reopened in September of 19, we became a Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. And it's we cover the 10 stages of genocide and also human and civil rights in America. We trace 12 different groups and their achievement of rights in America. Beyond that, we offer, since much is done virtually right now, we offer virtual tours of the Holocaust wing and of the entire museum. We offer Camp Upstander and Upstander Institute. Camp Upstander is for the little ones. The Upstander Institute is for the older ones, and those are free during school holidays. Other times, we inspire upstanders. We spread kindness. We embrace difference for the little ones. For the older ones, we study human rights. We study the Holocaust. We study genocide. Those are 3 separate units for them. Additionally, we have signature Upstander speaker series every year. We have a civil discourse series, which has become increasingly important given the polarization within our society. We serve as a convener for topics upon which reasonable adults disagree. We have a Crucial Conversations series. Last year, it focused on race. This year, it's focusing on anti-Semitism. We provide online toolkits on race. We're putting together one now on anti-Semitism. And these are for everything from educators to students to families who are educating their kids at home to adults. So we provide a real range of materials for people.
And what age are you doing this at beginning in middle school, going through university, or what?
Actually, some of our programs are for the K through kindergarten through 5th grade, including our trunk program, and those trunks, which carry classroom sets of books and other materials and curricula, go out to schools. But our museum focus itself, so the physical building focuses on 6 through 12, grade 6 through 12, and then college and adults as well. And so we offer, and we also have professional programs for corporations who are looking to learn about implicit bias and also the Holocaust and its ramifications as you go forward.
Because Holly, one of the things that the AJC is really advocating is that there be orientation about this in colleges and universities.
Absolutely. I was just listening to Sara speak and I'm thinking, like, this is exactly what we need. We need to multiply this work, getting the word out, raising the awareness. That's what I think our biggest issue right now is, ignorance over the issue, and ignorance that this is actually an American problem. It's not a Jewish problem. You know, I think many of us think it might be a Jewish problem to solve, law enforcement to solve, government to solve, but this is on all of us and we all need to be part of it. And I think on campuses right now, there is an issue with increased anti-Semitism. And I would say it's not just coming from one place. Anti-Semitism today in America comes from several different sources, if you will, whether it be the far right, the far left. We have it within religious extremists, and that makes it really complicated. And unfortunately, on some of our campuses, this has become an increasingly challenging issue.
Well, it is complicated without a doubt. And let me just point out something that may seem a little bit different, but some people would say, Holly, that because the Jewish community worldwide has focused so much on the Holocaust and continues to focus so much on the Holocaust, that particular emphasis, and by the way, I'll combine the emphasis in schools now of diversity and neo-Nazism and racism and all that there's so much emphasis on it that it almost creates a backlash in and of itself. Is that at all valid or not?
It's a really interesting question because on one hand, you know, Holocaust education done well, you know, we can see that it's impacted students and they have a different perception of Jews. They learn about anti-Semitism. They know that it didn't end in 1945, but that it's still with us. On the flip side, a lot, like when students just hear about the Holocaust, they don't really know what it means, or they know that Hitler is the epitome of all evil, and they take that and compare it with other evils, even though it's completely out of context. We saw this, unfortunately, with some of the stay-at-home order protests this summer, blaming your governor as being like Hitler. And, that actually distorts the Holocaust. And I think it actually can lessen what Hitler did. It can be a dog whistle to anti-Semites. So it's a complicated space. I do think, though, that we need to continue to teach it as a lesson, but make sure that as educators, we do it well.
One of the challenges that I read in your survey is that many Jews are uncomfortable and reticent about letting others know, especially law enforcement, that they've been victims of anti-Semitism. How do you combat that?
This is one of the biggest challenges right now with data and reporting. Anti-Semitic incidents are underreported. In our survey that we did, American Jewish Committee, we found that 76% of American Jews who had experienced anti-Semitism in the past 5 years didn't report it for a couple of reasons. One is the belief that maybe nothing would be done. This is kind of the resignation in the fight. We report it, but we don't actually see anything be done. We know that 46% of American Jews who reported anti-Semitism online received no response from the tech platforms, that they were operating on. The other issue is the normalization of the problem, that it doesn't, someone made fun of me for being Jewish or hit me, or, but I don't need to go to the police because that's, a burden. It doesn't rise to the level of seriousness of reporting it. But unfortunately, we're normalizing it when that happens. And so it's a kind of a two-part problem that we're seeking to solve right now.
One of the other things I found interesting in your study, and maybe both of you would like to respond to this, is that anti-Semitism is coming from the far right, but also the far left.
I was actually reading a piece today before we joined the program, and they were talking about anti-Semitism in Europe, but what they said holds true. They refer to anti-Semitism as a bridge hatred. So it's a hatred that unites the far left and the far right because it speaks to both of them where they live. It rolls racism and conspiracy theory into this nice, neat, explanatory package for people who are looking for explanations, and the Jews become the target group. What I would say is, when you talk about hatreds and prejudice, it's not that the Jews are the only group that's ever been targeted, but in many ways, anti-Semitism is this ur-hatred. It's one of the earliest hatreds, and it's a hatred because of its explanatory power. And it's not rational, but because of its irrational explanatory power, it has been with us for millennia, as Holly said.
The only thing I'll add to Sara, because that was spot on, and this is why it can be used by both the far right and the far left, is what differentiates anti-Semitism from other forms of racism is that anti-Semitism is actually assails Jews for their perceived power. It's that conspiratorial piece. Racism, vilifies its victims as inferior, but Jews are almost vilified for their superiority, for having too much power, too much wealth, too much control. And that element is on both sides of the far right and the far left today.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Holly, because as I think is the case, the interesting part is that the vast majority of Jews are not wealthy. They're not any different from the rest of us who don't have as much money as we'd like. But there's that group there. Now, just in the time that we have left, and we only have a few minutes left, and I'll start with you, Sara, and then Holly, and then Jim will close out the program. What can that viewer do? I mean, what can they do personally? What can they do in their community, in their group, in their church, or whatever?
To fight anti-Semitism?
Uh-huh.
What you can do is you can stand up. You can be what we call for at the museum, which is an upstander. And an upstander stands up not just for their own rights, but for the rights of others. And when you see something wrong, you work to make it right, whether that means saying not on my watch, whether that means doing public programs to support people, whether that means reporting things that you see, whether that means simply being a good friend and an ally when you see somebody who's been targeted, any number of things. I mean, these don't have to be world changing. What they have to do is be life changing in the area where you live and work and hold your life.
Holly, I'm well familiar with the American Jewish Committee, and you do such good work across all denominations. Tell our viewers a bit more about how you do work with different groups to build a consensus on these important issues.
I'm really glad you asked that, Jim, because I think if there's one big takeaway from this conversation is that this is not going to be up to Jews alone to solve. And this goes for other forms of racism and bigotry. This is a societal issue. And I think American Jewish Committee, we recognize that. We recognize that we need allies, we need partners, we need to build coalitions. And so one of our biggest outreach efforts is to interreligious and intergroup organizations, individuals, leaders to work together on common, shared issues, whether it be fighting hate crimes, whether it be protecting our houses of worship, whether it be, feeding the hungry, uplifting the poor. Like these are things that kind of bring us together as Americans, and fighting discrimination is one. And so we work with others to fight anti-Semitism, but also other forms of bigotry as well.
And tell our viewers again your website.
ajc.org, O-R-G.
And let me also just encourage everyone to visit the Dallas Holocaust Museum. I want to get the right title, the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, because it's really, again, beyond anti-Semitism. It's just terrific displays and educational materials about racism and human rights and various forms of bias. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. We really appreciate your involvement in talking with us on such a key and sadly continuing important topic. And let me remind all of you that you can continue to follow Dennis and me on your favorite social media sites. And if you've by chance missed a program, you can always go to McCuistionTV.com, catch up. Let us know what you think about our programs. We're always interested in hearing from you. And remember, you can join us almost every week as we talk about perspectives that matter with people who care.
For more information, call 214-750-5157 or email nikkien@nikkimcquistion.com. Visit our website at www.mcquistiontv.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at www.twitter.com/McQuistionTV or download McQuistion TV video podcast on iTunes.